Hi, my name is Alessandro Cangelosi and that's a video tutorial coming from cgcookie.com for Max Cookie. Today we'll try to use the basic 3ds Max feature to create a simple smoke simulation, and we'll use just particle flow with some forces, nothing so complex or so special. You see that the setup will be really simple, and you see that in viewport we have something that can be understood to understand how the simulation works, and we'll prepare also the material to render the scene, and we'll have a really simple rendering with shadows for the smoke and controlling also the shadows casting over the smoke itself. So let's start working at this new scene. So let's start preparing the scene, and we'll try to do something really simple. Imagine to have just the basic particles from 3ds Max to do something like that. So let's try to create some kind of dust or smoke. So the first thing we have to do is to check the scale. So we can work at metric and centimeters, and we have everything set in the right way. So let's close. And we can use, for example, directly particle flow. Let's create an emitter, and the emitter can be, let's say, maybe 35 centimeters for 35 centimeters. We can rotate it by 180. Let's have a plane as a ground, so this one will be ground. We can remove the grid using the G key. The ground can be obviously bigger, so let's make 8 meters by 8 meters, so we have enough space to work with our scene. Let's select the particle flow source, and this one will be the PF smoke dust. So let's open the particle view. I'm rescaling the particle view because it's on the second monitor. Okay, nice. And let's move the scene. So you see we have a basic particle system, and it is just launching particles on the top. We can set the scene to have more frames, let's say maybe 300 frames. And we say that the particle starts before, so let's say 50 centimeters of pre-roll. In this way we say that the particle starts before our first frame, because our first frame is the 0, and we have the particle starting at minus 50, so we have particles at the beginning. Then you see that we have no more particles at frame 65, because the particles stop to be emitted at frame 30. So we have to say that we have particles emitting until frame 300. So we'll have particles until the end. Let's move a little bit the shape there, the viewport, and also the particles. You see that now we have a low amount of particles that are flying away really fast. So let's try to change something. Let's remove, maybe we can work later on the rotation. Actually you see that we have the position icon is set to volume, so the particles will burn in the volume of the particle flow logo. Or we can decide to have, for example, some points, but we'll see later if it is needed. So then we have the speed. Actually it seems really fast because we have 3 meters and no variation. Let's try to see with 50 centimeters with maybe 15 of variation. Let's see in play. You see that now it is moving slower, and it seems a little bit better. Let's have more particles. So first of all we say to show 100% of particles inside the viewport. so we have more particles than before. You know, obviously, that if you like to create a photoreal smoke or something like that, you know that we have a lot of tools like Afterburn or FumeFX or Phoenix, but in this case we see a really simple way to create smoke just using the feature we have inside 3ds Max. And this way can be really useful because it's really fast and can be used for example for long distance smoke, also more complex and high quality projects. So back to the speed, we can have a little bit of divergence. Let's try with 5, but let's try to use more particles. Let's go for 2000. In this case, you see that we have the particles flying away, and we can have maybe the particles there can be a little bit more little, so 25, and the speed can have a little bit more divergence. So you see it is growing in size during the animation, so it is rising and growing. Okay, we have the rotation, and to see the rotation we can see just using, for example, the geometry. So you see that the particles have a different rotation. Okay, back there we'll still continue to use the cube because it is really nice to use the cube in viewport to have a sense of volume. I like to start using some forces. So let's say that we have a drag. So we'll try to simulate dragging. Let's say that it starts when the particle starts. It is useful because if you set later at the beginning, we'll have particles that are not using the drag, so the movement will be strange, and it is better to have the force working on the entire animation. Let's use the basic value, and we set to use a force. For the moment we use in the event even 001. Let's use the add button, and you see that this force is working, and we have the particles grouping all there. So let's use a lower force over both axes. So let's say maybe 3%, 3% and 3% also for the z-axis. Maybe we can use a lower value. Let's try with 1% on both axes, and you see that we have more speed at the beginning and less speed later, but obviously we'll have also the depth of the particles, because you see that there is a point where the particles stop to move. So we have to use a delete event, so we can put the delete there. Actually it is set to all, so all particles are deleted. Obviously we use the by particle age. Actually it is set to use 60. You see that it is too much, so let's use maybe 90. So you see we have particles going away, and we can use maybe also a little bit more. So let's try with 100. It can be higher because I like to go out and have more time to see particles growing. Okay, nice. So let's save the project so we can be sure that everything is working fine. And let's go in the July. So 3ds Max, particles, and let's call it smoke with PFlow. We can copy the name and use it as scene name. Okay, nice. It is saving. Okay, so now we have the particles moving, and I like to have also a little bit of spinning. So I like to see the particles rotating during the animation. So let's go to have the spin. Now we have a rotation of 360, and it is really fast. So we say that actually maybe we can have 35 spin rate. You see it is lower than before, and it is better. And back again. We can have also a little bit of variation, so 10 can be enough. So the particles are rotating during the growing up and the rising. So now we have the force moving the particles, we have the particles rotating, and I like to have some kind of forces that moves the particles. So we can have, for example, a wind, because we'll use just basic feature from 3ds Max. In the other case, you can use additional event in particle flow, for example, the random walk. I will use another force because I like to have control with a different value for both. So we can have this one, we can put up and add there. Actually it is a force, but we don't need the wind, we need just turbulence. So let's say that we have a little bit of turbulence, for the moment not so much, and you can see how it is moved, but it's really chaotic. Then let's say that we have more frequency and the scaling is really more little. So you see it is starting to be something more interesting, but let's go to have, before we can try maybe with 0, 1, it is too much, 0, 0, 5, and let's try to use a lower turbulence, and let's see the result. Okay, the scaling is not bad. Okay. We can try to have a little bit more speed at the beginning. Let's try with 65. You see we have the particles rising more and expanding using the cows. Okay, nice. So now we have a nice movement for our dust. Obviously, if you like, you can add another wind to have some movement due to the wind animation, and you can use the same force there, or you can add another one to control the influence parameters by every single force you are putting inside. Then let's see what happens if we like to control also the shape of our particle system. So now I like to interact with the scaling of the particles. You see that we have a scaling there inside the shape, but I like to use a scaling during the particle life. So we can use a scale event and we can put it there. We have to set, first of all, this one obviously can control the scaling of the particles. First of all, we have to set as absolute the type setting. Now we can change the scaling. You see that actually we are changing the scaling of the particles, and we can say to have something like that, 65%. And then let's say that we have, or maybe we can go at -50. Okay, and we have this value. then we set to auto key, and we go to the life of the particles, and we have 130, so 50 with 80 frames. As 80 is when the particles, and you can scaling, let's say maybe something bigger. For the moment we'll stay with something like that, and then we say to change the syncing. So we say to sync not by absolute time, but we ask to use the particle age. So you see that at the beginning the particles are using the first setting, and I mean the 6-8, and then they grow during the life of the particles, and then they can be deleted. Let's use a lower value for the delete there, so let's use just maybe 3, and back at the settings with 0 and save. Okay, perfect. So let's recheck, and you see that it is working fine. Okay, so we have now the right scaling for the particles, and it seems that it is working in the way we like. So now we need to work on the particles, and you know, we have cubes, and we need to make it similar to a dust or a smoke. So the first thing we see is that we need to change the shape. Our shape actually is a cube. There we have 3D or bidimensional. You see that there actually we have, for example, the triangle, and we have a lot of possibility there, but we need something different, because we need also to control the orientation of every single particle. So we can use a different shape operator. You see that there we have the shape facing, shape mark, and shape distance. Let's try to use the shape facing. Shape facing, if you check the description, say shapes facing create a flat particle shape, and in fact we need a 2D flat particles that is oriented towards the camera, and that's perfect. The viewport or an object. So let's try to use this one. So we can remove the shape, so we can cover with a new one, and you see that actually we have just some kind of flakes moving. So you see we have the look at to the camera, so we can do something really simple. We can create a camera from this point of view. You can use also the Ctrl+C shortcut. So now we can say to look at the camera, and we can select the camera 01. Now we can say use parallel direction, so you see that all the particles are moving in a parallel way towards the camera. Something that we see is that the size is too little. We have the scaling, but we need to set the size of the particles. So you see that, but obviously I was not thinking about the scaling, so that's good to control everything from there. And to control the scaling from there, we can go back to, let's say, -50 for the start. So we can go at the beginning, auto key, and we use a higher particle scale. And we have to check and control also the other parameters. So we have to remember to go before there or the scale and set the type to generate once, so it will generate the scaling of the particles there, and in this case we have to set to relative first. So you see we have a lower scaling at the beginning and a bigger scaling later, but we need a different value. So let's go again in the shape facing and let's scale it, and we can try with something like that. Okay, so save again, and now we have the particles there. If we go to render, let's set, we can use obviously the scan line, it's not important. Let's go for our resolution 900 and 400. If we go to render, we have something really simple. We have this kind of effects, so we can work a little bit on the scene, and we can have a simple material for the ground. So let's call it ground, and we go to have a simple map. We can use we don't need nothing so complex, so we can use a substance, and let's go to have a texture, and we can use the asphalt, for example. Let's go in the asphalt map, we see it. Let's change some parameters, we remove the blurring, and we set also a bigger resolution. So let's say 2000 for 2000, but we remove it from the view to speed up, and we can have a little bit of specularity, and we can use this one to control the specular level. So as a copy, then we go inside and we say to use the specular channel, and then we say the same for the reflection, but we before we use the same for the bump, and we say to use the bump. To speed up, we can have no reflection there, we need more blurring, and let's say that we have maybe 15. Let's retry to render. You see that we have a nice looking asphalt, nothing special. Now I like to create a lighting, a really simple lighting. So let's go to have a light, and we go for a standard one, target direct, and let's say something like that, and we can have the shadows. Let's use the inverse square. Let's set the falling from there. Let's say that we have more power. Let's change also there the value, and let's say maybe something like that. Okay, if we go to render, obviously we have something like that. Now we need something else. We have to control, first of all, I like to have still more lighting. Let's go for 2.5, maybe let's go 4. Okay, something like that. Let's have again a little bit more fall off and a little bit less hotspot. Back to the render. I think that it can be enough. So now we need something for our shape there, and I mean we need a texture, and let's call it smoke, and we need essentially a material, and it will be a simple material. So let's try to use this one inside particle flow. So we select the particles, and to assign the material we use for the moment a material static. Sorry, we need again the render node. Okay, and there we can put as an instance the smoke. So now if we go to render, we have obviously just a gray material. Then we need to control the opacity because we have to create something else. So the first map we can put is a gradient frame, and we need to use a different setting. We need a radial. You see we are seeing the map. So the map is visible completely at the center, and it is not visible out the map. Let's see what we can have in this way, and you see that we are starting to have something. Then we can simulate a little bit of self-illumination. Let's see what happened. You see that it is a little bit better. Maybe we can use a lower value. Obviously you can set also a more complex smoke with a more complex material, but actually we are doing something really simple just to introduce the technique we are using. Okay, so now you see, first thing we have to do is to change the material again, because we need a better map, but we need something else also, and I mean we need to control the transparency of the shadows. To control the transparency of the shadows, we need to control the light, and in this case we need a different map. I mean let's select the direct, and we have to set as ray trace. Let's see how it is changing. In this case we are porting, obviously that's a slower calculation, but we are using something more similar to a volumetric calculation because it is taking care about the transparency of the map. So we have the right transparency calculated by the shadows there over the smoke and also over this map, and I mean also on the ground. So back to the material, and first thing we can do is to have the noise. So let's start to having noise. Let's start scaling it. Let's go with a fractal, and we can start checking what happened. To speed up the rendering during this phase, we can go inside render and remove the shadows. Back to the rendering, so we see just the map. So let's say that maybe we have more transparency, so there you see the map is less visible. Okay, and let's see with the turbulence if it is better. Maybe not, so let's go back to the fractal one, and let's go to a more level to have more complexity. You see that we are starting to have something better. Let's say that maybe we have a little bit less, but it is a little bit bigger. Okay, so now I'd like to control also the map inside. So you see that actually we have just a gray, but we can have, for example, a noise, or we can use, for example, a smoke map. Let's see the smoke map. You see that it's going better than before, but I like to see the scaling of this map. Let's try to have a lower scale. Maybe still lower. You see we are introducing more detail inside. Okay, and actually we have to save. Actually we have the opacity controlled by this map, and we can have again maybe a little bit more noises. Let's try with 0.35. Okay, and we can be back to the shadows to see how it is working. Okay, you see that it is not bad. We can have a little bit more shadows to have a bigger deep, and we need just to have, for example, 4 for self-illumination. And if we go back there, let's render just an area. We have just a little bit less self-illumination and more shadows. So you see we are doing something really simple. If we like to have something less visible, we can try to have all lower value there. So we can have, for example, there a gray, there something more gray, and there it's okay in this way. And you see we are obtaining a less dense smoke. You can control the scaling and the details just using the 2 maps we are using now. And I mean the smoke inside the diffuse and the gradient inside the transparency. As you see, it's not bad the quality we are obtaining, and you can simulate different configuration for the smoke, just playing with different value for our maps. And you know, that's a really nice technique to create smoke, for example at distance, or for example if you like, we can see how it looks there, or if you like to have something really fast to be calculated, because you can use, for example, at distance also normal shadow maps. You have to take care about the particles moving, because actually the particles are flying away, and you know, you have to take care about those particles, so you have to take care inside the simulation and the particle flow configuration. To have a more complex animation, you can also animate the smoke there, for example. So we can have, because actually you see we have no animation inside the map, but we can animate the face, let's say something like that. So you see the noise is slowly moving, so you will have something more complex than before. You can use also higher. It depends on the speed you are trying to achieve, and you can do the same with the gradient there. So you can have a face also for this part of the map to change a little bit the shape of our particles, so it is changing during time. Okay, nice. If you need to let's see, if you need just to say you know, there we have always the same density. Let's set back the shadows to finalize our scene. We have just to set in the rendering. Okay, let's try to render. Okay, it is working. So I mean, if you need to control the density of the smoke based on the age of the particles, in our setup you have just to make something really simple. Now I show you what you have to do, and you have to change the material to control. Let's close and reopen. So that's our actual look. Obviously you can change everything manipulating the various parameters we have there. So if you like to have something else, and I mean you like to control the density, you have just to change this material, and you can go in the particles just to have select from there. you can move this material and it means there is some kind of problem there with the material. I don't know why, but let's put I have to restart. Okay, now it works, so we can reset. So if you like to play with the density as we were saying, you have just to move this one there. You can have this one. You see that we have the aging controlled by the delete, and you have just to change the material, for example, to a blend. Keep all the one. The second one will be a no density material, so let's say transparent, and you set to 0 the opacity, and there you control everything, the mixing with the particle age. So this one, and you see we have black. We need the black at 100% live, and we need the white at the beginning, and that's all. So for the moment that's all, and I hope to see you back on MaxCookie to check for new tutorial coming from cgcookie.com. Bye.